Welcome to the Amash Files, your one-stop podcast for Justin Amash's march to the presidency, featuring deep dives into who Justin Amash is, campaign analysis from experts, and news from the campaign trail. If you're ready, let's get started. Well, hello, friends. This is Eric, along with Tyler.
Hello.
And we're here joined by the delightful, our new friend, Hannah Cox. She's a libertarian-conservative commentator, writer, and activist. Her bylines include her monthly Newsmax column, Life and Liberty, NPR, Fox News, The Hill, The Washington Examiner, and The Daily Caller. All things I've not been on myself. Hannah's work revolves around the defense of free markets, limited government, and individual liberty. She's been instrumental in repealing the death penalty in 2 states, multiple constitutional litigation cases that explored private property protections and the right to work, and on a wide range of policy reforms in Tennessee that touched on school choice, tax repeals, criminal justice reform, and healthcare services. She currently resides in New York City, although she's currently on sabbatical from New York City. So, Hannah, thank you so much for joining the show.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Well, we're really thrilled to have you. And, of course, the big, huge news that we brought you on about, we are the Amash Files, so we're following Justin Amash and his new launch for the presidency. Sort of what's your initial reaction to the news?
I mean, it's been a really big week, right? I can't come down off of cloud 9. It's been so exciting. I think everybody I know and everybody around me is thrilled. And, for those of us who have been following Amash for a long time, this has been a while coming. We've been waiting with bated breath to see if he would attempt to run. And he's left us breadcrumbs, but never really tipped his hat one way or another. And so I just think it's been a thrilling week. I think it has instilled a lot of hope in people who were feeling pretty pessimistic, both about the current crisis, the coronavirus, and also the upcoming election. So I know there's a lot of people like myself who now have a candidate to get behind and somebody they can really be excited to promote and vote for. And I think that this is a tremendous opportunity for us to spread the message of liberty. I think you've got a country that is really at attention in a way that it hasn't usually been in the past. And I think people are recognizing that government has failed across the board, especially recently, but we're also seeing so many ramifications of failed big government policies that have come to light during this crisis as well. And you've got 2 really deeply unpopular candidates that are marred by sexual allegations and that really don't have any great solutions to the problems we face. They're just big government hacks. And so I think Justin Amash has a really unique opportunity to come in and be who he is. He's young, he's articulate, he's sharp as a tack, he's enthusiastic, he's charismatic, and he's a really great torchbearer for the policies of limited government, free markets, and limited government.
So you mentioned you've been following Justin for a long time. When did you first hear of him?
That's true. I have been a Justin Amash fan for a minute now. I heard of Justin Amash right as I was first getting involved with politics, which would have been around 2013 or 2014. And he was running for re-election at that point for his current House seat and had been primaried pretty heavily by a guy who I think off the top of my head was a former big donor and lobbyist for the GOP. And they basically had run this guy to try to take him out because the Republican Party didn't like that he wouldn't do what they said. And they ran a really nasty smear campaign. They insinuated that he had ties to terrorists because he had a Middle Eastern background. They really said some really horrible things. And so when I first discovered him, it was actually through his victory speech in that race.
Yeah. No, I actually interned for his campaign that year, and I was in the room when he was making that speech.
Where were you guys at? It looked like a restaurant or something.
Yeah, it was a sports bar and a hotel here in Grand Rapids.
Okay. But he came out so strong and was just came out swinging. He didn't pull any punches and really called them out for how they had behaved and said that they owed him an apology for their disgusting smear tactics and campaign. And I thought it was amazing. I think so many politicians, never say what they think and certainly aren't forceful in pushing back. And I thought that he seemed really tough, and I liked that a lot. And so that it caused me to start looking more and more into him. It was around the same time that I was just figuring out what I believed in general. So I was already sort of on a path to discovery, and I found him to be very instrumental in helping me figure out what I believed and why. As I'm sure you guys know, he posted every single vote and why he voted as he voted. And so in reading his analysis, I was able to really develop a much deeper understanding of the Constitution, of economic policy. He turned me on to the Austrian School of Economics, and I got into Hayek and some of his other heroes. And so for me, he was just formative in so many ways. And then I think it was 2015. I was still in the music industry. I worked in the music industry in my first career, and I was looking at making the jump into politics full time, but was being very picky because I, learned from Amash, and I wasn't about to go work for anybody that wasn't exactly along with my ideology. And so I saw he was hiring a legislative assistant, I think on Facebook. And I was like, I am in no way qualified for this, but I'm going to shoot my shot. So I applied for it, and I ended up getting an interview with him, and ended up going through that process for a couple months. And I didn't get it. Somebody else beat me, but I got to go a couple rounds and get to know him and some of his staff during that process. So it was still a great opportunity to learn from him and get to know him. And I've just been a huge fan ever since, and increasingly more and more so. He's never let me down.
So, I mean, no, Anna, I completely agree. My story is a little similar to yours, just 6 years earlier, because he was my state representative when he was in the Michigan State House when I was 13 years old in 2008. And so Austrian school, Bastiat, Hayek, the same whole trajectory as that. You said a lot more articulately than I could, but totally agreed 100%. You mentioned early on in your bio, you call yourself a libertarian-conservative. I think that there was a time, probably from Ron Paul's first Republican campaign to the 2016 primary, where that was a very dominant strand, or not dominant, but an existing strand, like a subculture in the Republican Party and the broader conservative movements. Since the election of Trump, I've kind of observed that fade away. It hasn't gone away entirely, but there's a lot fewer people who would describe themselves as that or be comfortable with that. Have you noticed anything like that?
Absolutely. Well, I think first and foremost, we're just sort of watching the significance of words move and change and sort of lose their power in some ways. I think nowadays, when someone says they're conservative, I don't know what that means. That could mean you're a nationalist Trump supporter. That could mean you're a libertarian. That could mean that you're a Marco Rubio. I mean, there's so many things that fall under the conservative umbrella. And I think that is also, we see that what's happening within the GOP is sort of indicative of that, right? People don't really have a solid, consistent ideology anymore. And I think it's leaving a lot of people to feel very politically homeless and not feeling like they fit very neatly anywhere. And I think that it's also making it hard for us to signify who we are or what we are. And so for me, I say I'm a libertarian conservative because I think that I don't fit neatly anywhere. And I think it's not really just to say I'm a libertarian, because that probably connotates that I have a couple viewpoints that I don't have. And it might also signify that I'm very invested in the party. And be frank, my interest has never been with advancing parties, period. I see them as vehicles. I'm really concerned with advancing policy, and that's what I have built my career around. And if there's somebody in the GOP that's going to advance those principles and policies, I'll get behind them. If there's somebody in the Libertarian Party that is going to advance those principles and policies, I'll get behind them. If they're independent, same thing. So I say that because I also want to represent myself fairly. And I also don't think it's fair to say that I am just a blanket conservative. I think even in the truest sense of the word conservatism, if you go back to its original definition and viewpoints, I am by definition not really a conservative. My viewpoints are much more libertarian, but I do have some areas where I have overlap with them, like I am pro-life. I don't think that you always find the majority of people in the Libertarian Party are pro-life, though you do find them, of course, that they are. So there's a couple things like that. I also think that it's a bit difficult when you start getting pigeonholed into a party, because I don't think anybody's ever going to agree with any party 100%. There's sort of this running joke of who's really a libertarian.
Oh, yes, right.
Nobody, because nobody is going to be 100% anything. And that's the danger of parties, is it makes us focus so much on tribalism and where we fit versus, the main points that we're trying to advance. And I think that also can lead to people being a bit binary in what they're willing to do to get things done. As somebody who's actually worked on policy and actually been responsible for passing pieces of legislation, I recognize that I can have this viewpoint that is here, and this is where I want to move. But ultimately, I might have to take baby steps to get there. And that's a theory of change that I think sometimes gets lost when you get too absorbed into party ideology. I think that can be a little bit removed. And I've seen that even a little bit this week, for one example, with the issue of immigration and Amash. I am an open borders advocate. I think that is where we should ultimately get. I also recognize that we are nowhere in hell close to getting there, that is not feasible anytime soon, and that the actual dynamics are moving against us. And so if we want to be effective and impactful and hopefully start turning the tide back towards moving this way, we're going to have to take baby steps. And Justin Amash coming out and raging for open borders does nothing. Me coming out and raging for open borders does nothing. Pushing for baby steps to start moving us in that direction does do something, and ultimately I think could get us there. And I feel like that can be very lost when you start getting too branded or too into certain subsets of politics. So that's why I call myself that. I think that's why Justin has chosen to stay independent for some time. And that's something that I'm pretty passionate about. I hope that libertarians really think about those things and recognize that we can have really strong ideologies and places we want to move the needle, but we also have to be willing to take pragmatic steps to get there.
I mean, I agree. I mean, I think that's kind of the heart and soul of at least the Hayekian vision of libertarianism. He followed Edmund Burke in that regard. Gradual change from a society is how you actually get something substantial and lasting, not a French Revolution-style overthrow of all existing norms. So I completely agree with you there. What are your thoughts on the Libertarian Party as a whole? Obviously, you're not a member of any party. You're not particularly partisan. What do you think about what they've done in the past, say, 4 years since the rise of Trump?
To be totally frank, I was frustrated in 2016. I did get behind Gary Johnson. I advocated for him strongly. I wrote many opinion pieces, and I did a lot of campaign work as far as trying to elevate him and trying to ensure that people were aware of him and advertise him in that way. I didn't think he was a very strong candidate, to be totally honest. He was certainly the best option compared to Trump and Hillary.
Yeah.
And I felt comfortable voting for him. But I thought Austin Peterson was a much better candidate that time around. I still think that. I think that he was much more poised, much more articulate. I thought that he would have a better ability to communicate libertarian ideas to a conservative audience, which was who we needed to get. I didn't see anywhere where he broke with libertarian theology as far as his principal policies went. And so I thought that we made a compromise. And I do say we, because I do identify as a libertarian, even though I haven't been significantly focused on the party. I thought there was a real opportunity for us to educate people that year because people really hated Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. And you know, if we could just get enough to get somebody in the debates and have somebody representing these viewpoints and push back, that's a significant thing. Because, you know, people like me, if they don't have that presented to them, if they don't encounter a change agent that makes them stop and think, they're probably going to keep staying within this two-party system and just kind of being generic voters, which is what I was for most of my life as a Republican until I started to really encounter people that were moving me. And I thought Gary Johnson ended up really blowing it in some ways, had some major gaps, and I was pretty disappointed in that. I have been hopeful over those 4 years that we would have learned some lessons from that and really learned that it does matter that you have a candidate that is ideologically aligned. Yes, of course, you know, we don't want to have somebody come in and take over the party who isn't truly like with us in theology, such as the GOP had happened with Trump. But to get nitpicky over someone like Justin Amash, who is unquestionably aligned with the party and who has been a faithful steward of those principles for many, many years in Congress, to get nitpicky over his length of time of involvement with the party, or to get nitpicky over a couple platform issues where he might not be as, you know, adamantly libertarian, I think is a real shame. And I think that people who are in that camp are failing to learn those lessons of 2016. Justin has a real chance to move the needle and to actually get in front of people and advocate in a way that is going to be impactful and that I think could ultimately blow open the doors on the barriers that have been holding back third parties for so many years.
Absolutely agree. And I mean, you know, we always thought that 2016 was unique because of how unpopular Clinton and Trump were. And I think Biden and Trump are kind of even more unpopular than Clinton and Trump were in a lot of ways. And I think I agree completely. Justin's a more dynamic candidate than Johnson in a lot of ways, more accessible, more able to articulate that vision that people can connect with. So I'm optimistic as well. Have you followed any other candidates in the Libertarian primary right at all? Gray, Hornberger, any thoughts on them?
Not extensively. I was aware there were a couple of people who were running for the Libertarian ticket before Amash announced. Nobody that really in any way caught my interest. And not to say that I'm sure they're fine people. I'm sure their ideologies are correct. But, you know, I just think it says something if you have someone like me who's as involved in politics as I am and who is pretty aware of the Libertarian Party and libertarian entities and people, and they've failed to even get my attention. I don't think that speaks very highly of their prowess as a candidate.
And I think you can kind of see that in sort of the social media reaction to Justin declaring on Tuesday. People are frothing at the mouth saying you're going to steal votes from Biden, you're going to steal votes from Trump, you're going to ruin America, you have a big ego, blah, blah, blah. Obviously, he wasn't the only person running for the Libertarian presidential candidacy, but he's the only one that people are actually getting interested and engaged with enough to say the usual third-party arguments that they keep blowing out against it, even though Hornberger or whoever else might still have that opposition
I think
element.
that's exactly right. I think you can tell that people are afraid of Justin's candidacy, and I think they should be, because so shockingly enough, it just keeps getting worse with the other two parties. And I think, we have an even greater opportunity now than we had in 2016. Who would have thought? You've got two old white men who both seem pretty senile to me, and both have been incredibly charged or accused of sexually assaulting women. And both, like, let's be clear, I believe in due process. I think that they should be entitled to that as anyone else. But, let's look at their behavior of just even what's on camera. You've got Biden sniffing little girls all over town for decades. And you've got Trump on camera talking about his behavior. So I just think that it's, the whole thing to say that these things are blown out of proportion doesn't really land with me. I say that pretty seriously. I thought that what happened with Kavanaugh was a disgrace, in contrast to that, and wasn't really something that should have been treated as credible, and didn't really seem to have anything significant to back it up. Both of these two have had serious allegations of this nature. I know most women I speak to would not consider voting for someone who has been accused in that manner and whom we believe is probably likely guilty. Even aside from that, I'm not going to vote for either of them because their policies are horrible, and they aren't anything that grabs me. So I think that we've got a real window here, and I think Justin is a powerful candidate. I don't know of anybody who's ever run third party or independent in my lifetime who's had the abilities that he has, the ability to really take big ideas and distill them down in a way that the average American can understand and grasp, and get them interested and passionate. And, he's a fighter. He's not going to get run over by Biden or Trump. We've seen that he can scrap. So I think that he can hold his own. And I'm just really thrilled about what this could mean. And to be clear, the intention is we want to take votes from Biden and Trump. I hope they both completely collapse. So I think it's funny, those arguments, when they come out, people don't seem to understand.
Right. We want 38%, right? I mean, that's
definitely
that's the goal.
Justin's made some points both about that and that something you mentioned earlier. There's millions of Americans who feel completely unrepresented by either Biden or Trump or Democrats or Republicans that are looking for someone they can actually believe in, rather than I dislike X more than Y or I like Z instead. I want to touch on social media a bit briefly because I know you're very, very active and prominent on a couple platforms. Some of these reactions are just shocking me. Not even just the stealing votes, but like these insane allegations about Justin Amash that have no basis in reality. He's doing it for ego. He's a phony. He wants to destroy America. He's trying to protect China. Like all these insane things. Have you seen anything that really stood out to you as some narrative that's taking hold on Twitter or Facebook or something else?
One of the reasons I'm able to be as prolific on social media as I am and still maintain my mental health is I mute crazy people. No, I haven't seen most of those things, but that's because you actually don't get into my notification stream unless I follow you back. So I don't know what they're saying. I'm not bothered by them. I mean, I think it's to be expected. I have seen some of the stuff about China during the impeachment, which was just, ludicrous. I don't know what it is about people that tend to be a bit more conspiracy theory bent on the right, but certainly that has come up from time to time. But the thing with Justin, and I can say this from the limited time I've spent around him, is he's not only someone who seems very principled in his public life, but certainly in his private life as well. And I think that he's a person of character, and I don't think that we have to worry about anything legitimate being thrown at him. And I think that makes people afraid too. So the less and less you have to actually use against him and his record, the more you're going to see people really stretching and making things up. So I think that might be a good sign. They're already going for the conspiracies.
It was interesting. I did not realize you had applied for a job through his office. And it's funny that you mentioned it because we'll have dinner and he'll talk about, the application process and the people who apply and, and how he's shocked at how bad grammar is in people who would like write a cover letter. And what was that process like? Was it similar to other interview processes you've had, or was it very different?
Lord, it was the most intense thing I'd ever lived through. No, I'm kidding. It was intense, but it was a learning process. Even just going through it, like I said, I applied and I heard back. Like, I think it had to have been at least 4 or 5 months later after I applied. I heard from Bobby, his chief of staff, and asked me if I could do an interview in the next week. And she just mentioned, we really prefer to have people in the office. And I lived in Nashville at the time, but I was going to New York for a work conference. And I was like, you got it, I'll be there. So I jumped on the train. Ironically, that week was the week Trump announced. So I remember it because I was staying in the Trump Soho in Manhattan. There was a little TV in the mirror that I was watching while I was getting ready, and he came out and announced and said what he said, and I almost burnt my hair off with my curling iron. I'm like, what? And then the hotel was just swarming the rest of the day with reporters. And so I left there and went to DC to interview with Amash. I was so nervous. Like I said, I was still in the music industry. I was very green. I was so green that I didn't even know really that I would have hated being a legislative assistant. Like that's not that I should be in, but I just loved him and was like, who knows? So I went in, and I remember I was already very nervous. I'd been reading for 24 hours straight, just trying to cram my mind with anything I could possibly be asked about. And I got in there and they said, oh, we'll be right in here. And they opened the door, and I thought I was just interviewing with Poppy, and I think it was the communications director. And we walked into his office, and Justin came around and, hi, I'm Justin Amash. And I was just so startled that he was actually going to be in there interviewing me, and so excited to meet him that I swear I was shaking under the table for the first 5 minutes because I could not believe that I was sitting next to Justin Amash. So that's how groovy I am. But it was about an hour-long interview. They asked me really in-depth questions. I remember one of them was something along the lines of how would I solve ISIS?
Whoa.
I mean, yeah.
Foreign policy.
No softball questions, very in depth. And then the second phase, I got through the next round, and they sent me it was a mock project to see how you did. So they sent me 2 bills at 8 p.m. and I had to have them turned back in by 6 a.m. and analyzed with some sort of indicator on how I thought he should probably vote. And yeah, so it was a lot. It was very intense, but it made me appreciate him even more. He's thorough, even for a legislative assistant.
What was your reaction on July 4th last year when he announced that he was leaving the Republican Party and announcing his independence? I mean, you've mentioned that you're obviously more independent. You're not a party person. What did you think about his piece? Because I imagine you read it and, figured out what you did and didn't like about it.
Yeah, I actually saw it right away because I was up to do a 5K with my parents for the 4th of July, which is a horrible idea. And so I saw it come out, and I was really excited. I thought it was tremendously courageous. I wasn't extremely surprised by it. I really anticipated to hear him announce he would run closer in time to that. I thought that was really the start of something. So I was surprised when, we were waiting for months and months and still there was no word. But I thought it was incredibly well written. It certainly had an impact. I heard about it from a lot of people who aren't particularly paying attention to politics usually, or especially in depth to libertarian issues. And I thought that he did a good job of getting people's attention and really illustrating who he was. And it was a great way for him to start introducing himself to people in America who probably haven't encountered him yet.
What do you think his next steps are? I mean, assuming he wins the nomination, Libertarian Party, which he might not, but what does he have to do to get to the point where people can say, this guy's got a chance to win? Because I think, when you look for someone, the third party ticket, right, it's how do you convince people that they're not just throwing away their vote? So what do you think his pathway is to get to that point where people think he's got a legitimate, chance?
Well, I think one of the largest obstacles people have always faced trying to run third party has just been exposure. And I think that getting on camera, getting the media to care about you, getting a base to follow you on Twitter, these are obstacles other candidates have really not been able to overcome. I think he is going to be able to overcome those obstacles. I think he's proven himself to be very shrewd in how he uses the media. I think the media tends to treat him pretty fairly. I think that could change if they start to see him as a significant threat to Biden, but we'll see. I think he already has proven that he is very capable of using his social media channels to connect with voters in a very deep way, and I think he'll continue to do that. I think on top of that, getting the message out there about alternative pathways and helping people understand that the two parties, the team mentality is not getting you anything different. They might talk about different policies on the campaign trail. They might sound very different to you, but if you start watching how they're governing, it's not that different. And it increasingly is selling you out and selling down the river. And I think that, this gives him a unique opportunity right now, just watching how everything is unfolding with the coronavirus, because we're seeing them do it right before our eyes. We saw them just give this massive bailout to corporations. We know that pisses Americans off, and it should piss them off. And he's the one guy who's sitting here saying, give the money to the American people. And this is the difference. I always loved the F.A. Hayek, short story you would call it, Why I'm Not a Conservative, that says, people in America are always trying to say that conservatism is progressivism's opposite, when in reality, conservatism is just slow progressivism. They will be where progressives are in 20 years. Progressives are just moving faster. They're the same track, and progressives are the train on that track that's hurling itself off a cliff, and conservatives are merely the brake. They don't have an alternate pathway. They are really just there to say no. Whereas classical liberals, libertarians in America actually do have another train track that they're on, where they're proving there are real solutions to the problems we face. You're not wrong about the problems. I don't think anybody's ever come in and said that. You look at Bernie supporters, a lot of what they're talking about, they're not wrong about the problems. They're not wrong that the system's rigged. They're not wrong that they're getting screwed over. Their solutions that they are being fed are not going to fix the problem. In fact, they are more of the same that got you there. But no one is coming in and educating people and telling them, here's why things are the way they are, and here's how you actually pull that back, and here is the alternate path that works. I think Justin can do that. And because he's young, because he's charismatic, and because he's a tremendous messenger, I think that he can really grab people's attention and start to move them. So I think that will be enough, certainly to get him into the debates. And then, if he gets into the debates, that really breaks the field wide open. If you have him up there next to these two morons, really, I just can't imagine, anybody but the most tribal of people would not gravitate towards him.
So I think that's a really good ending. I have one final question. What is one book you'd recommend to everyone listening to this podcast to try to understand the liberty idea?
Actually, the first book I was ever given when I was first dabbling in politics was The Law by Frédéric Bastiat. And I recommend it to everybody because it is so ascertainable. And for people who maybe, and I think I used to be in this camp, I didn't think I was especially smart. I certainly didn't think I was capable of digging into economics. I would never have thought that was something I would be even remotely interested in, much less capable of wrapping my head around. And so when I was given the law, it really made me feel more competent and capable of going further. And I quickly recognized that I actually could dig deeper, and that I was smart enough to understand these things, and that I really could play a more meaningful role in the world if I took time to learn more. So I think that's a great entry level book for people to just sort of get their feet wet.
Couldn't agree more. I mean, and Justin literally mentioned that book in an interview along with Road to Serfdom when I was an impressionable young teenager, and here I am today.
So now Tyler is opposed to the plunderers, just like you and I too. Well, Hannah Cox, thank you so much for being on the show. We look forward to following the campaign, hopefully touching base with you later when Justin has gotten the nomination, hopefully when he's, maybe heading to the debate stage.
Let's hope so. Thank you guys for all you're doing. It was great joining you.
Thanks. Hey, everybody, it's Eric. I just want to add this audio clip to the end of the show. This is actually the clip from Justin's Victory Night speech in 2014 after the primaries where he defeated Brian Ellis. This is the speech that Hannah was referring to when she was talking to us, where Justin basically breaks all the conventional wisdom, where Justin tells Brian Ellis and Pete Hoekstra what they should do. I want to give you a little bit of background just so that it makes more sense. Pete Hoekstra was a former congressman for the west side of the state, even more west than we are, actually on the lakeshore in Holland. He was a congressman for quite a while, Republican. He ended up working for some lobbying firms that worked in national security because that was the previous committee he was on when he was in Congress. He then helped run this campaign run by Brian Ellis, where it was really a despicable smear campaign. They had Devin Nunes, congressman, who was declaring that Justin Amash was al-Qaeda's best friend in sort of a subtle racist slur in some ways of trying to associate Amash because of his Middle Eastern background with Middle Eastern terrorists and al-Qaeda at the time. It seems so long ago now. You also had them running ads accusing his family of being like plants for the Chinese government because their family had tool production located in China. Most of that is, almost all of it now has, of course, moved down to the United States. But anyway, at the time, there was a decent amount there in China. And so these attacks were kind of crazy. Also, at the same time, you had a very strong establishment part of the party that was kind of tired of Justin not playing ball with leadership, and so they wanted to remove him. They put forth this guy named Brian Ellis. He's sort of an unknown quantity within the community. He was a businessman, some sort of financial guy who was worth quite a bit of money, and they thought they would use this in order to defeat Justin. In addition, they lined up all the usual traditional Republican PACs and lobbying groups, the Right to Life, National Rifle Association, Farm Bureau, Chamber of Commerce, all were aligned and put significant resources, energy, quotes in papers and in the news to try and defeat him. He defeated all these forces pretty soundly. And this is his speech that he gave afterwards, where he's denouncing Pete Hoekstra and Brian Ellis and telling them what really every politician should say after they've been treated as poorly as he was. If you want to watch the actual video, the entire speech, the best thing to do is just to Google Rep. Amash criticizes Ellis Hoekstra, and that's Hoekstra. If you're not from West Michigan, you're obviously not familiar with Dutch spelling. The video is actually with Wood TV.
I want to say to lobbyist Pete Hoekstra, you are a disgrace. And I'm glad we could hand you one more loss before you fade into total obscurity and irrelevance. To Brian Ellis, you owe my family and this community an apology. For your disgusting, despicable smear campaign. You had the audacity to try to call me today after running a campaign that was called the nastiest in the country. I ran for office to stop people like you. To stop people who were more interested in themselves than in doing what's best for their district. Everyday Americans are taking back their government from the crooks and the cronies. They're taking back their government from the political class elites. The people who were so blinded by their arrogance that they thought they were going to run this smear campaign and be successful. They're taking it back from the insiders who have contempt for the American people. And I'm proud to stand up for the American people. And I'm going to go back to Washington, and I'm going to continue to fight for liberty, the Constitution, and for you. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Amash Files. Please subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast player and share it with your friends. We'd appreciate it if you left a written and 5-star review too. Send all questions and guest ideas to amashfiles@gmail.com.